I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus. Good afternoon, Bowling Green, and hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whatever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my fantastic co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together, Rebecca and I will be bringing you an hour of unforgettable radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your family, and the aerobacteria that are floating around up in the atmosphere, and the archaeobacteria that are down, miles deep in the earth, and pretty much everybody and everything that's alive in between, because, like it or not, all of us are wrapped up together in this wonderful little planet called Earth. And we've got a good show for you today. We're going to chat for a little bit, and then I had a guest lined up, but unfortunately last night around 11 p.m. I got an email from him that he wasn't going to be calling in after all. So we're going to look at the situation with the anti-global warming disinformation. And it turns out there was a big congressional investigation into it. And it turns out that, surprise, gasoline, fossil fuel companies are actually funding global warming denial.
Huh. Yippers.
Wow, who would have thought we could
Yeah.
do something like that?
Kills the breeze.
So we'll talk about that at about the quarter after mark. And then we heard from our wonderful advertisers and patrons. And then, Rebecca, what will you be talking with us about today?
I'm going to talk about the anniversary of the Toledo Water Crisis. We were slimed.
Right, okay. Kind of not an anniversary you'd celebrate, but definitely one that's important to mark. So 10 years, wow. All right, then it's Ecological News, and that will be our show, except hopefully someone will call in. We love to get calls from our listeners at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. Call anytime during the show, and we will just put you right on the air. You can call about any ecological issue. You don't have to be calling about things that are happening, things that we talk about, because, there's tons of environmental stuff to discuss right now. And so this is an interesting week for me. This past week, I was actually at the Wood County Fair most of the week, which was it's always an interesting experience to watch people walking around at the fair, see the animals. And it was interesting because if you were listening last week, you knew I spent some time, just got back from Chennai, India, where there's cows wandering around, just walking out into the middle of the street, whatever they feel like it. And there were lots of cows at the fair too, but they're being led around like, they've got leashes and harnesses, and it was just an interesting comparison. Saw lots of animals, cows, pigs, and so forth. our booth at the fair, we were selling vegan cookies, which some of the people at the fair who like raise cattle and dairy weren't too happy about, but they were delicious cookies, and the people who bought them from us were very grateful, because a lot of people just literally just can't eat dairy, or and choose not to eat things like
And unless
meat.
you raise dairy cows, why do you care?
Yeah. So it was a good experience, as it always is. It was lots of fun, but it was hot. That was one thing about this year. This was literally the hottest Wood County Fair I've been to, and we've been doing it for like 12 years. So it was very interesting that what's happening is, it's obviously getting hotter, right? I mean, it's just, we don't even have to debate about that really, except that there are people who are still denying the global warming. And it's really kind of interesting that even as it gets hotter and hotter, the humidity goes up, the storms get more intense. Oh yeah, I actually had to drive back to Western New York to attend a funeral Thursday and Friday, and as I was coming back Friday, west of Cleveland there, I got caught in that tremendous storm that hit this area too, and it was, the amount of rain was just, the sound of the rain on the car was so loud that I could barely hear the thunder, even though lightning was striking like 100 feet away from me. I could see the flashes, and it was like immediate thunder, but it was like I could barely hear it above the rain, which is a symptom of global warming induced rain, because as we've said before on the show, what happens when you put more CO2 in the air, you can hold more water vapor, and so when the rain does come, basically it dumps in huge amounts, and we're seeing that happening all over the world now. If you've got any kind of social media feed, you're seeing flooding literally on every continent. And again, this is right there for everybody to see. It's obvious, it's happening.
This one guy in one of my online pet groups was devastated this week because he lives in Arizona, and he let his dog, his Frenchie, outside for like 5-10 minutes, and it died.
Oh, from the heat?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Especially like the smoosh phrase breeds I think have trouble,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the heat. So.
Yeah, they already have trouble. I remember.
Just felt so bad, but who knew that was going to happen?
Right.
You got to be so careful.
Yeah, I remember I pulled into a driveway once of some people that owned one of those bulldogs, and the bulldog flopped over.
Yep.
And it was because they have so much trouble breathing sometimes. Whenever anything slightly exciting happens,
Right.
like a car pulling up, they can't get enough air and they pass out. So that was kind of so I could see that happening. And yeah, they're having record heat out west. That's actually one of our news stories. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later. But again, so people are having these experiences. Everything's happening firsthand. You're seeing things. You're going to the fair. It really did suppress fair attendance, I think, especially on the hottest days. People would get there and they turn around. They're like, I'm not walking through this. And,
no.
Yeah. But so why is there still this hard core of people that are completely denying global warming? And the answer is that there is a funded campaign to keep convincing people of this. And it turns out that back in April 30th, there was a joint congressional committee that was it was both the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability and the Senate Budget Committee, and they came out with this report basically saying that the big fossil fuel companies, and they named them, they're saying Exxon, Chevron, Shell, BP, the American Petroleum Institute, and the Chamber of Commerce are all working together, and they're exchanging emails. This is what came out in the congressional investigation. And they are very deliberately trying to convince people that there is no such thing as global warming, even as it happens more and more. And one of my own personal experiences was when I was up at Garden Island. I was talking to the boat captain, and it turns out that Lake Michigan didn't freeze. This is the second year in a row where Lake Michigan had no ice. And that is unprecedented. You know, that just doesn't happen. It's cold. It's supposed to be cold way up there.
Yep.
Nearer the Arctic Circle than us, but
Muskegon, where my mother's family is from, is famous for getting upset because some years the level of snowfall has been like a millimeter short of what they would need to get federal disaster funds.
Okay, right.
And they have those little flags they sell people. They're poles with a little orange flag you're supposed to put on your radio antenna back when that was a thing, because that way people could see you coming if the snow was like all the way above your car than both sides at the intersection.
Yeah, that's how things used to be.
Yes.
Right. And it's rapidly no longer that sort of.
Our big
Winter
Christmas
is no longer
tradition to visiting grandma and grandpas, we would go out and see the water plant, because it has this big old WPA water plant in Muskegon. It's all fancy with carved banisters and stuff, and the waves come up and leave sort of like these weird ice lion looking thingies on the railings every year. So we got to drive back there, and it's our Christmas tradition. Got to go look at the ice lions at the water plant.
Well, that's cute. Yeah. But again, not this year. Not this past winter. And as these things build up, as you go into winter with a hotter lake, then it's less likely that there's going to be ice. And without ice reflecting, the nice white ice that reflects the solar radiation back out into space, then the lake gets even warmer during the winter. And this is all part of the big global, what, Rebecca?
Positive feedback loop.
Positive feedback loop.
Yes.
Which, that should be in almost every news story today, because, it's just happening. It's so obvious that it's happening, and it's happening in so many different ways that, I was following this one professor who looks at climate stuff on X, and he put out there like 4 big things, like the Thwaites Glacier melting, the Antarctic ice retreating, the Arctic ice retreating, and he wanted people to rank them, like which is the most important. And I put in there, all these things are feeding each other.
Yeah.
And so, like the collapse of the Atlantic Meridional Current, the AMOC current that carries the heat from the Gulf of Mexico up into Europe, that collapse is tied to the melting of the glacier in Greenland, and they're both feeding each other. As the glacier melts, it weakens the current, and as the current gets weaker, more warm air gets up into the Arctic, which melts the glacier, and that's the positive feedback loop. So
come to picture as a sort of a noose, possibly.
Yeah. So these companies, which by the way get $600 billion every year in federal subsidies, so that's where a good chunk of our tax dollars are going, actually, is to Exxon and Chevron and BP. So these companies basically have been coordinating the response to the global warming information that the scientists are putting out. And what they do is they try to divert the actions of like legislatures and environmental groups, and they try to divert us over into ineffective strategies for dealing with it. And so, for example, they made a big thing about switching from coal to natural gas, which, when you first look at it, okay, yeah, burning coal is like something like 8 times more greenhouse gas than burning natural gas, burning methane. But what actually happens when you mine for methane, when you do fracking and things like that, that creates tremendous amounts of methane leakage. because the way you get methane out of the ground now is you do fracking, you pump pressurized polluting liquid down into the ground that breaks the bedrock, and then the methane seeps up through those cracks. And when you make a break, the break can be miles long. And so you've got your one little well that you've replenished with fracking, but that only captures a tiny fraction of the methane you just released by fracturing all this rock. And so NASA has shown that there's no difference between burning coal and burning methane because of all the methane leakage. And one of the regulations that all the fossil fuel companies have been fighting are regulating methane leakage.
Yeah.
Because it's expensive, and almost impossible. But if they were to do it, it would cost them a lot of money. So they're both saying switch to gas, but don't fix the leakage problem.
Yeah.
Another one of their big strategies is the carbon capture. And, Biden is guilty of falling for this one, hook, line, and sinker. Many times he's given speeches about how wonderful carbon capture and storage is, and yet it has never worked. They've been attempting it. There have been pilot projects since the 1970s, and inevitably what they find is you capture the carbon from the air, you pump it down into the ground, and then it leaks back out again because it's a gas.
Right.
You're trying to pump a gas into the ground, and usually they try to pump it into places like methane gas fields or oil fields. Right. And
Great.
this has the effect of extending the useful life of the oil field, because once you've pressurized it, you can squeeze out that last little bit of oil that's in there that you can't get just by pumping. But what then ends up happening is that, what the situation is that those oil fields and those gas fields are full of holes, and the holes were drilled by people. They're filled with oil and gas wells, and so the gas that you carbon capture, just carbon escapes right back out those
Right.
wells. And so, once again, methane leakage. And methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide.
Right.
So if you had to choose between equal amounts of methane or CO2, you'd pick the CO2, but instead so all these solutions that they try to divert us over into actually make the problem worse. And it's a very long-term strategy. This report from the Joint Committee there talks about how they, for example, they're embedding their own scientists. Like Shell has a program where they take their scientists, that are thoroughly pro fossil fuel, and they embed them into colleges. And they gave it a specific example of Berkeley, basically by donating tens of billions of dollars to the college to create like a chair of a department. Then they put their guy into that chair, and now you've got in Berkeley, you've got Shell scientists who are claiming to be academic researchers and publishing papers and saying, oh, it's not that bad, we could live with global warming. And so they specifically to Berkeley, they gave them $25 million over 5 years to take one of these fake scientists into their faculty and influence everybody else. And colleges and universities have a tendency to go where the money is, because you've got to have money for your professors, you got to pay salaries and so forth. But part of what this Joint Committee released on when they reported on it back on April 30th was that they've got emails. they subpoenaed, they used congressional subpoena power to get the emails from the Exxon executives and the BP executives that have set all these anti-global warming strategies up. And it's pretty clear, it's pretty damning. And yet that report kind of didn't make the news. right? I mean,
For some mysterious reason.
I don't think we reported on it, and it wasn't, I had to actually go searching for it in order to find it. And so it should have been headlines. It should have been, the main story for a week or so, at least. But instead it just kind of, they put out their report and nothing much else happened. So what triggered my decision to do the story on this today, I mean, apart from my planned guest bugging out, was that I've been seeing this meme lately, and there's a specific guy. There's a fellow named John Clauser, and he was the 2022 Physics Nobel Prize winner, and he has become a global warming denier. He's one of these guys that just, claims everybody else is wrong and I'm right. And the thing to remember about this is that he is a physicist who studies quantum entanglement with photons. Okay, that's what he got his Nobel Prize in. He does not know anything about atmospheric chemistry. He does not know anything about meteorology. But that hasn't stopped him from making this claim. And his claim is basically that it's cloud cover that decides what the climate's going to be. So it's the number of clouds that determines how hot everything's going to get. And since clouds are cooling, we don't actually have to worry about global warming because we've got just as many clouds as we've ever had.
I'm hot.
Yeah.
We need more clouds, I guess.
I know. And
in fact, lately it's been hot when it's cloudy.
Exactly, right. Because
it's just been very weirdly gray and damp and hot.
Yes, because the wet bulb temperature, the humidity is going up even as the regular temperature is going up. And so we're getting both. We're getting hot, muggy clouds.
Yes.
Kind of like they have in Chennai. We're not quite there yet, but it's getting there. And
it's just like when you're in the car and Mom says it. Oh, it's not that hot. Feel the nice breeze, and it is hot.
Yeah. Yeah. But so
and she needs to stop being so cheap and invest in some air conditioning.
So when some crazy crackpot scientist makes a claim like this, and by the way, all atmospheric scientists have universally said this theory is crap, and all you have to do is look at the planet Venus to see why it's crap, because Venus is permanently 100% cloud cover.
Yep.
And yet it has very stable temperatures on its surface. Temperatures hot enough to melt lead.
It's not nice and cool there.
I believe it's 400 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface. And yet it's covered with clouds all the time. According to John Clauser's theory, Venus should have cooled way off by now because there's so many clouds. But also the debate over whether clouds are in net warming or cooling has been raging amongst meteorologists for the past 50 years. And actually it was just like about a year ago that the final definitive study came out, and overall, clouds are actually warming because, they do reflect heat out into space when you hit the top of them, especially bright white clouds. But they also trap the heat that's trying to escape from the planet and block it from getting out into space. And the whole thing about global warming is it's not too much energy coming in. Actually, NASA just released a 50-year graph, and solar radiation has actually been declining for the past 20 years. It's not too much heat coming in, it's not enough heat getting out. And so the final definitive study last year amongst meteorologists shows once and for all, net clouds are warming because they trap more heat trying to escape into space than they block solar radiation. And so this fellow, John Clauser, is just completely wrong on every issue. And to be fair to him, he has no expertise in this area. So being wrong is not a surprise when he tries to make a prediction. But what happens is somebody like John Clauser comes along, makes this ridiculous comment, and the forces of disinformation, the companies like Exxon, Chevron, Shell, BP, API, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce take that and they turn it into a meme, and they disseminate it across all the social media platforms. And now probably, I'm willing to guess, most of you have probably seen the meme where, you know, they say, oh, look at all these Nobel laureates who say global warming is not a big deal. And John Clauser is right there front and center in big, bold letters. And so basically what I'm saying here is trust your own senses.
Yeah.
Okay? You know, trust what you see. When you see that Lake Erie has not frozen over in several years, when you see that Lake Michigan didn't freeze over the past 2 years, and probably Lake Superior will be next with no ice.
Notice how hot it is before you get to the fair.
Right.
Stop for a minute while you're walking to your car. How does it feel outside? How are you going to feel in another half hour to an hour standing there?
Yes. And compare that in your memory to past fairs.
Yes.
And fundamentally, trust yourself.
Yep.
Trust your own eyes. Trust your own body telling you how hot it is. Trust your own observations more than you trust people like John Clauser and these other global warming deniers. So that's the main lesson I want to, the main idea I want to get across to people is stop believing these memes that get fed to you. I know I'm talking to a minority now, that the vast majority of Americans understand global warming. It's like 80%. They understand global warming. They want something done about it. They think it's a real problem. So the vast majority of us already accept this and know this. But to that 20% that keeps polluting my Facebook feed with these senseless memes, you know, go outside. Get out of your air-conditioned house, go outside and just try to hang out for a while in places where you remember being able to spend time during the summer and it was comfortable, like in the shade. Go back to those places and see how they are now. And, you know, like I say, trust your senses, don't trust the media.
Honestly, I think though a bigger problem right now is sort of like the softcore deniers, you know, the ones who are kind of like, oh, sure it's a problem, but we have another, 10, 20 years before it gets really serious. No, we don't.
Yeah,
we really
no,
don't.
No, we do not have another 10 years. We have maybe 8 years now. We have this tiny little window is all that we have left, and we better use it or we're in trouble. Okay, so enough about that, and now it's time to hear from our sponsors.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They also restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to visit their website, www.wcparks.org. The website again is www.wcparks.org. They are also available on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Just search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful for their support.
And we're also grateful to our patrons. Our patrons are amazing people with wonderful foresight who understand the world a little better than maybe most of us. And they have gone to patreon.com, that's Patreon. There they found our Patreon page for A Green Future, and they signed up to become patrons. And so every month a little donation comes out of their account. Nothing they can't afford because you get to set your own donation level. That money comes over to us, and that's how we can afford to keep this show on the air. So thank you so much to our patrons. All right, Now, Rebecca, so we're celebrating, we're marking an anniversary
At
today.
least it hasn't happened again since then, but.
Well, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that's apparently this past Friday was the anniversary of the famous Toledo Water Crisis, which was 10 years ago. I got most of this from an article by Tom Henry in the Blade from 7/29/2024. A decade after water crisis, progress for Lake Erie remains sluggish. And it has. So yeah, what happened was in the early morning of August 2nd, 2014, apparently the city was ordered by the Ohio EPA to alert people on Facebook that tap water was poisoned by algae microcystin. And, well, okay, microcystin is not technically algae.
Okay.
We'll get into that.
All right.
But yeah, so, and you not only could you not drink it, you were not even supposed to bathe in it or touch it at all. Just leave the water alone. Which was pretty serious for people who have no cars. And it gets all their money at the beginning of the month, so they have no money to go buy water anyway. But yeah, apparently what actually happened was there was an unusual algal bloom extending down from Monroe to Toledo, Monroe on the coast of Lake Erie, Monroe, Michigan, to Toledo's water intake crib. And then a strong nor'easter came along and pushed the algae underwater so it got sucked into the intake. So, yeah, the water plant apparently was at that time set up to remove small amounts of that toxin, but not very much. So we were just all kind of up the creek. And I know people were like, oh, it was just a water panic. It wasn't really a water crisis. And, oh, I got through it just by drinking iced tea from the store. Like, well, good for you. But there are people who could not get to stores in Ann Arbor was the nearest source of water at the time, I think. Clean water. There are people who could not drive out to Maumee where the fire department was giving out free water, or a couple of suburban places where, there are people who have elderly people, babies, very small children, disabled people to take care of who needed to be able to bathe people and prepare food for them. And it was kind of a nightmare, if you were not standard middle class person with 2 cars. It really, I called my dad to bring me over some water. He didn't know there was a water crisis and had coffee, I believe. So I told him to put it down and go drive to get some water. So he did. I had to share with, he got like a big plastic tote full of water there that he'd brought, but that had to go for him, their 3 neighbors, me, and I think one of my stepmother's relatives or something. Okay. So, yeah, I didn't get very much, but I got like a pitcher full. And I think that was gone. By the 3rd day, I woke up and I'd had my last glass of water the night before. I had 1 glass of water. I drank it. Then the first thing the next day, by that time at least, they had like water stations set up at the fire department. But still, I had no bus fare, and the fire department was an hour walk in either direction. Like the 2 places, I think it was the east side and Central Catholic on the west side. So it would have been about the same walk either way. So I just set out with my little wheelie suitcase to go get some water. And on the way, I met a guy coming in who said, oh, the water crisis is off. And I was like, okay. Turned around and went back home. So, yeah, I was about to go full third world there and have to walk like an hour every day and back to get water.
In the summer sun.
The summer sun wasn't as bad then as it is now, but still. So yeah, it was kind of a big deal if you lived through it, and for some people more than others. But yeah, people keep saying microcystin. They keep calling it blue-green algae, but then telling you, oh, it's not really algae. So I looked into that. Microcystin is apparently produced by freshwater. It's a toxin produced by freshwater cyanobacteria, commonly known as blue-green algae. Algae are non-flowering, usually aquatic plants, including seaweeds all the way from seaweed to single-cell organism. They contain chlorophyll, which is, I guess, how they qualify as plants, but lack stems, roots, leaves, vascular tissue, and so forth. So cyanobacteria are not scientifically classified as algae. There are apparently multiple different species in diverse genre that can produce this toxin. And the blooms are a problem worldwide, including China, Brazil, Australia, South Africa, U.S., and Europe. So yeah, more of that is going to happen as time wears on if we're not very careful. So I wanted to look up and find one good thing about blue-green algae, and turns out that algae in general fix 60% of carbon dioxide.
Okay.
So, although I think the non-poisonous ones can do that too. So.
Right. Well, and the poisonous ones aren't always poison.
Right.
They don't always produce the toxin. It's just what conditions are right.
Exactly, and those are conditions which are the result of global warming, aka climate change. So yeah.
Yeah.
That was fun times for everyone.
Yeah. And this brings up a topic for a call-in. I mean, do any of you out there remember 10 years ago the Toledo Water Crisis? What sort of experiences did you have? Did you run out of water? I know we didn't have it down in Bowling Green because we get our water from the Maumee River, but I basically offered to let any of my friends from Toledo come down and fill their jugs at my house. 877-909-1007. We'd like to hear your memories of the Toledo Water Crisis 10 years ago today. Okay, so now on to ecological news. And so here we go. Our first story was a press release put out by Vina Colley, our friend who's been on the show before. And she's the person who is trying to protect the people down in Piketon, in Portsmouth, Ohio, where they have terrible contamination from nuclear waste and nuclear fuel reprocessing. And she's with an organization called PRESS, which stands for Portsmouth Piketon Residents for Environmental Safety and Security. And they put out a press release because what they've already done studies, epidemiological studies by Joseph Mangano that show, we have a caller. Hello, caller, you're on the air. Hi.
Hi, this is Barbie.
Hi, Barbie.
Hi, Barbie.
Hi, I heard y'all talking about call-ins for the water crisis and everything, and I know for me personally, I was out and about when it was announced that the water crisis happened, so I hadn't heard. And all of a sudden I came home, and sitting at my door stoop was several cases of water, and I could tell it was from multiple people.
Oh.
And I was definitely feeling the love, especially because I had guinea pigs that needed water.
Oh.
Well, that's nice. Yeah. Inspirational story there.
Yeah.
Yeah, people really did pull together to deal with that, I think.
You saw the best and the worst of humanity.
Yeah, I really got lucky in what I was seeing. People were really kind and looked out for me. I don't think I ever had to ask for water because people just kept delivering it. And it really meant a lot to me. I couldn't thank people enough. It really helped me out because, like Becca, I didn't drive, and I was just kind of stuck with what was available. And people really came through and looked out for each other. And as unfortunate of an experience as it all was, I also got to see a lot of the beauty in it, and that was special to me.
All right. Well, great. Well, thanks for calling in, Barbie.
You're welcome.
Okay. So kind of an inspirational story of the water crisis. And yeah, so if anybody else wants to tell us their story, 877-909-1007. Okay, so back to our news story. Vina Colley with Press, they did a press release because, as I said, they already did a study that showed that cancer epidemiologically has increased down there because of the terrible contamination with all sorts of different radionuclides. But what they did with this study is they found they had another scientist do research, and he's discovered that the radioisotopes, things like neptunium, americium, all the other 200 radioactive isotopes that are in nuclear fuel, you spent nuclear fuel. So once you start reprocessing it, you release all that contamination into the environment. He has found this in all the plants and animals in the region. So so not only do we know for sure that the contamination is causing harm to humans, we now also can say that it has entered the food chain in that region, and the plants and the animals all have higher levels of radioactivity than they should. And so so radiation hurts every living thing. Radiation is antithetical to life. That's why there's no life in most of the universe, because most of the universe is being bathed in radiation all the time. We're incredibly lucky to have this tiny little envelope where the atmosphere and the magnetic fields of the sun and the earth keep the radiation away from us. That's the only reason we're alive, frankly. And so what they're doing down there in press, and what Vina Kali's asking for, is a congressional investigation into the extent and the damage of this radiological poisoning, because it's possible people should actually be getting evacuated from that region. I mean, if you're finding that kind of contamination, and you may be a situation like Fukushima, like Chernobyl, where there should actually not be people living there. So let's hope the Congress hears them and responds, because they really do. This is all being ignored and glossed over and pushed under. In fact, they've started enrichment again. It's like they didn't learn their lesson. They've reopened the Piketon enrichment facilities, and they're making more of these terrible radioisotopes, thanks to Biden. But they shouldn't make a new mess until they've cleaned up the old mess. That was one of my mom's rules when we were growing up.
That makes sense.
It was poorly enforced in my house, so I had a very messy house. But it's a good rule, and the government should be following it. Okay, next. This is a story. So that was a story about what happens at the end of the nuclear fuel cycle with fuels. Here's a story about what the middle of the fuel cycle, when nuclear plants are running. And this is a story from Beyond Nuclear, July 28th. Title is A $36.8 billion Lesson from Georgia. And it's talking about the Vogtle nuclear reactors, Vogtle 3 and 4, the newest reactors in the world. And it turns out that the Georgia WAND, Women Against Nuclear Disaster, and the Georgia conservation voters have filed a lawsuit, because what happened with the Vogtle plants is that the Georgia legislature passed something called HB 132. They just passed a law delaying elections for the Georgia Public Service Commission. And the reason they did that was because the people who were in the Public Service Commission at that time were wholly owned and controlled by the Georgia's utilities. Mm-hmm. And they did whatever the utilities asked, including rate increases, including continuing to build the Vogtle plants, even after it became very clear this was a financial disaster. And the only sane financial decision would have been to close the plants, stop construction before they started up. But instead, this HB 1312 added 2 years to the terms of the Public Service Commission members, at changing it from 6 years to 8 years, or in one case to 9 years. And they're still not having elections till next year, so it'll be even longer. And so the lawsuit says, look, you violated Georgia's Constitution. Georgia's Constitution said you need to have the elections at these points. And so by adding years to the terms of these Public Service Commission people, Southern Company and the other utilities were able to keep pushing the Vogtle plants, even as they were turned out to be natural economic disasters. And in fact, they are the most expensive electricity in the world. Those plants, for capacity wise, they cost $10,785 per installed kilowatt, as opposed to solar and wind, which cost anywhere from $900 to $1,000 or $1,500 installed capacity. So in other words, the Vogtle nuclear plants literally cost 10 times as much as an equivalent amount of wind and solar. And the only reason that they're in existence is because Georgia broke the law and kept in Public Service Commission people who had no authority to make these decisions, and had them say, oh yeah, go ahead, keep building. Right now, Georgia's electricity bills are going up for the average Georgian 30 to 40%, and they will stay elevated for 60 years in order to pay off the construction debt. And so essentially people are being driven. For people who study homelessness, often the breaking point of a family is the utility bill.
Yep.
Yeah, that's often that straw that breaks their financial back when they can't pay for the electric. Okay, now you can't pay for heat or air conditioning, and
now your pipes are frozen.
Now your pipes are frozen. Now your landlord kicks you out because you didn't have heat and you froze your pipes, and that's the process by which a majority of homeless people end up on the streets. And so this is a horrible, horrible situation in many ways, and I think they should still close them right now. Even though they're done.
Yeah.
I think it's not too late to reverse course, put in a whole bunch of wind and solar, and shut down those nuke plants.
There's a saying, throwing good money after bad.
Yes, that's what.
Although it's more like throwing bad money after bad, really.
Yeah, and Georgia's doing that at quite a clip. Okay, next story, and this relates back to Rebecca's story, and that is that the Lake Erie algae bloom this year set a record in that it has appeared earlier than ever. It appeared on June 24th. That's the earliest we've had an algae bloom since, or cyanobacteria bloom, since monitoring began. This was a story he ran in the Blade on 7/25. Algal bloom sets new record for arrival time.
The thing is about that, they solved the problem by, the reason we haven't had it again is that they did something with the equipment to make it better to sense the cyanobacteria early or something?
Yeah, they added extra filtering, extra carbon filtering at the start. So now our water plant, or Toledo's water plant, can take that amount of microcystin out of the water, but it doesn't actually solve the problem because the lake is still getting poisoned.
Because we are still dumping tons of agricultural byproducts in it, fertilizer,
yeah, and herbicides.
Herbicides.
Yeah, and so that is
animal waste.
That is the only way the problem is going to be solved, is if those things get regulated.
Yep.
And we've been doing the voluntary approach for about 30 years. It hasn't worked. Okay.
Yep.
Newsflash: if you try something for 30 years and the problem keeps getting worse, your solution is not a solution. So interestingly, once again, the algal bloom started near Monroe, and in this story they say, quote, for reasons unknown, unquote. I would like to humbly suggest that Furby 2 nuclear plant may have something to do with that, because it dumps its excess heat directly into Lake Erie at that point, and what cyanobacteria really need is warm water. Mm-hmm. The warmer the better, and the bigger the algal bloom. And so I think there's a reason these blooms keep starting near the hot water output from the Furby 2 nuclear plant. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's from the heat. So, all right. So we've got to balance all that bad nuclear news with a good nuclear story. We're going off to Taiwan. And Taiwan has made the decision to go nuclear free. And they shut down their second to the last reactor on 7/29. There's a story in Asia News on 7/29. Taiwan shuts down its penultimate reactor. That's a cool word, isn't
yes,
it?
It
penultimate.
Is. It really just means second to last.
Yeah.
It sounds super cool.
It does. Yeah, and so the last one is actually scheduled to shut down on May 25th of next year. and that would turn Taiwan into the first non-nuclear country in East
Yay.
Asia. And the nukes were supplying 5% of Taiwan's electricity. It's going to go, now it's gone down, nukes have gone down to 2.8%. The elephant in the room here, the reason, one of the main reasons they're doing this that nobody talks about is China, mainland China. As long as you've got a nuclear plant on your territory, you've given your enemy a nuclear weapon. Because all they have to do is blow up the nuke plant, and now they've contaminated a huge chunk of your country, which causes all kinds of logistical problems, and you know, and it's just a terrible thing. And so if you have a threat, if you have a neighbor on your border like Russia or like China, you don't want to have a nuclear plant that they can target. So they're proceeding, and good on you, Taiwan. Thank you for shutting your nuke plant.
Bravo.
Okay, next story from NASA's website on July 29th. Title: NASA data shows July 22nd was Earth's hottest day on record. And it turns out that July 21st and July 23rd also broke daily records, but they didn't break the hottest day ever record. That was July 22nd. That's based on 60 years of satellite data plus hundreds of years of direct observations using thermometers and stuff. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson says, in a year that has been the hottest on record to date, these past 2 weeks have been particularly brutal. And they were using two computer systems. One's called Mera 2 and the other's called GEOS FP. And what they both do is combine millions of data points. You know, there's temperature being taken all over the planet, and all that data gets sucked up and combined to give a global average temperature. This also agrees with European Union's Copernicus satellite. And basically, for the past 13 months, we've had every day has been a daily record. So like for the past 13 months, like Wednesday the 4th has been the hottest Wednesday the 4th ever. And we did have, this past week, we had one day which was not a record. So I guess that's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, one day out of 13 months is not enough to start celebrating. And it just wasn't a record. All it did was tie the previous record, which was in 1923. So.
All right, great.
Yeah. So we're cooking, folks. We're literally cooking here. You know, we've all got to do everything we can. Put on solar panels, start driving an electric car, start using those little electric bikes instead of driving somewhere. But it's happening, and so now it's official. We just had the hottest day in Earth's history, as far as we know. Next story, Public Citizen, July 31st. Outrage as Senate panel advances Manchin Barrasso permitting bill. So hot on the heels of the hottest day in recorded history caused by carbon dioxide, CO2, and fossil fuels. The U.S. Congress, in a bipartisan move, voted 15-4 to move the Energy Permitting Reform Act out of committee. And what this reform does is it basically gets rid of all the regulations on permitting. So basically you just ask for a permit and the government gives it to you now. Public Citizen, Tyson Slocum basically said this is laid out in Project 2025, that basically there's automatic liquid natural gas export approvals. You don't have to do any kind of environmental stuff. You just ask and they'll give it to you. It blocks renewables on public lands, interestingly, while removing regulations against oil and gas drilling on public lands. 360 environmental groups sent a letter to the senators saying, don't vote for this, vote this down. It opens up tens of millions of acres on public lands to new oil and gas drilling, and it opens up hundreds of millions of public lands in the ocean to do oil and gas drilling. And I have to ask, why is Joe Manchin still chair of this committee? He's not even a Democrat anymore, yet Chuck Schumer lets him run this important Senate committee on natural resources. So that's some really bad news. And so to counter that, our final story, a little bit of hopeful news. Ethiopia has banned internal combustion engine imports.
Wow.
Yeah, they just outright banned them. No more gas vehicles, not even compressed natural gas. It's part of a new economic reform that's going on in Ethiopia. And the main reason is that right now, every year, $5 billion of Ethiopians' hard-earned money, of which they don't have much, gets sent overseas to oil companies. So the thinking is, if we're not using gasoline, we're not going to be giving our precious last $5 billion to Exxon or Mobil anymore. It also is made possible because they just brought online a 5.15 gigawatt hydro project. It's called the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD, and it puts out more power than 5 nuclear power plants in electricity. So there are questions about whether they have enough electric car chargers to do this. There's 1.2 million vehicles on the road in Ethiopia. About 100,000 of these are EVs, but the EV imports are skyrocketing while the internal combustion engine imports have stopped because they have outlawed them. Population of 126 million, so about a third as many people as in the US. But thank you, Ethiopia, for leading the way and banning internal combustion engine imports. All right, that's it for our show. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to our caller, and we will be back next week. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
We are signing off.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No